In episode 10 of the podcast, I had a great conversation with my student and now client, Amer Khosla, about exploring artistry as an indie singer-songwriter based in India. If you haven't had a chance to check out that particular episode, I want to recommend it to you. Amer had some really fascinating insights on what artistry means to him and artistry's intersections with technique. But as you know, artistry is not a one-and-done conversation. There's so much more to explore, especially as artistry may mean different things depending on the musical genre. Hi, my name is David Sisco. My pronouns are he, him, and you are so welcome to my little podcast, Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy. This podcast is dedicated to the art and practice of teaching singers. It is an extension of my book of the same title, which has finally been released by Routledge Press this past July. Today we are going to continue our conversation about artistry, this time as it relates to Western classical music. My very special guest is my dear colleague and friend, Elizabeth Mondragon, an in-demand singer who frequently works with various Washington, D.C. based companies and in many different musical idioms. More on her in just a moment. But first, let's continue our exploration of artistry and how people define it. In his book, The Techniques of Bel Canto, Giovanni Battista Lamperti wrote that artistry is owed to the singer's interpretation of the text and music. He wrote, what the poet, and composer felt while creating the composition must be felt, or better yet, created by the singer. No interpretation can rightly be called perfect until the poetical and musical conception is exhaustively set forth, until the hearer, carried away by the artistic effect, forgets the artist in rapt contemplation of the artwork. In the publication Interlude, Francis Wilson notes artistry is about getting to the essence of the music, to such an extent that the performance takes the audience beyond itself, transcending the everyday and transporting it into another place where it can dream or imagine. In these instances, the performer allows their ego to step aside so that the music can speak. This transparency in performance is quite rare, and not all performers seek or desire it. Some prefer to draw attention to themselves or remind us of the difficulty involved in what they're doing. Author Peter T. Harrison advocates for a definition of artistry that is artist-centered. He writes, a voice in training is simply one that is being rediscovered for what it is, and all voice training programs should acknowledge this. If we begin with a serving music agenda, or worse, a packaging for the market agenda, we are unlikely to ever discover the true context of an individual's vocal wealth or communication capacity. For more on this, let's turn to our special guest, Elizabeth Mondragon, she, her. Elizabeth's performance experience ranges from opera and art song to musical theater and oratorio. Principal roles include Carmen, Rosina, Penelope, and Dido, and she has been a featured soloist in the Verdi Messa di Requiem, Bach Christmas Oratorio, Rossini's Petite Messe Solennelle, and Mozart's Mass in C minor. She's performed medieval music of Spain and Mexico with Ars Musicae Hispaniae Harp Ensemble, and American songbook reviews with DC's Songs for Seniors. She's an avid recitalist, featured in concerts at Wiscasset Salon Series, New York Arts Society and Wall Recital Hall, and a co-director of the DC Metro chapter of Opera on Tap. Her enthusiasm for new music has led her to regularly performing and premiering new works, as well as having long-established collaborations with award-winning composer David that's me. On a personal note, I went to grad school with Elizabeth and have tailored more songs to her voice than any other singer. She is innately musical and just such a passionate recitalist. She sang on my Carnegie Hall concert debut in 2014 and is currently visiting New York to rehearse for an upcoming recording of my music. Hello!
Hi!
Welcome to my podcast. Yay! So silly. As I mentioned in my introduction, for you that you're here to record,
Yes.
to rehearse
for our recording in the fall. And so it just seemed like a perfect opportunity to kind of ask you about artistry, because I think when I think of artists, I think of you and all the beautiful musicianship you bring to the work, all the different types of works that you do. So I wanted to start by asking you your definition of artistry, and does it change depending on what kind of genre you're singing?
My definition does not change. I had to think about this because I've never defined artistry before. And without sounding woo-woo or too academic, I think it's artistry, I think of it as an integration of a skill set and instinct, like the magic of the art, integrating those to become the most successful or compelling storyteller possible. So artistry to me is storytelling, compelling storytelling. That's like the simplest definition, but the things that go into becoming a compelling storyteller have to do with the combination of the skills you have, not just the skills of a technique, but the skills of being able to extract the magic out of something. So
Yeah.
that's like my baseline definition.
And I'm assuming there's probably like analysis, like musical analysis in that as well, like understanding,
Oh, definitely.
right, the music. And
Definitely. Understanding like what your story is, how you want to tell it, who your audience is, erasing yourself, your ego from the storytelling practice. You can't erase yourself because who you are becomes part of that.
Sure.
But leaving your ego behind in order to successfully tell a story.
Right.
Yeah.
It comes through you. It's not about you.
Yes.
Yeah. Learned that lesson the hard way many times.
We are but vessels.
Yeah, exactly. Great. So how do you go about developing your artistry, and does the process, again, vary depending on the musical genre?
It doesn't change a lot. There are some components that are used, skills that are used more than others. For instance, if I'm doing a song in a foreign language, I'm going to spend a considerable amount of time with my translation. In general, with art song, I tend to go down rabbit holes of what was going on in the life of the poet or the composer at the time it was written, because that might inform my performance practice, which I do less so with more contemporary styles, songs in English, depending on the poet and poetry. So many pieces have already existing histories in terms of the text.
Yeah.
So that has something to do with it. If I'm singing a song that is a poem that exists on its own or as part of a collection, that's one thing. If I'm singing a song that is, the poetry is taken from a story, say like the Mignon Leader,
Sure.
then that's an already established story. So I have to reconfigure who Mignon is as opposed to who I am telling this other story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. So what I'm hearing from that is certainly an exploration of culture,
Yes.
of the work, right? And then what is your process of kind of finding maybe like the synergies of where you enter into or relate to the song, like once you've done that work, right?
Yeah. Well, gosh, that's always kind of loaded because with some pieces you can easily find your connection to a text. I've experienced this. I know somebody who has experienced this. So, I mean, that's where your acting comes in. How much are you acting, and how much is something that comes from real life experience?
Sure.
And if in a song you're a character where it's an experience you've never had, finding something relatable can be difficult. But I think it's really, really important.
In musical theater, we talk about substitution.
Yes.
So you may not have had that exact experience, but if the overarching thing is fear of authority, right? You probably you call on something, from your life that maybe calls on that particular thing rather than that specific instance of a fear of authority.
Uh-huh.
That makes sense.
Well, recently I sang in Maddalena in a production of Rigoletto that was very not traditional, very non-traditional, set in a circus, and I was a ringmaster, and my character was downright evil. And Maddalena usually doesn't have that many facets. She's the brother's, he basically prostitutes her out to seduce people so they can rob them of their money and things like that. And in this situation, I am kind of like a puppeteer, making these things happening and watching from the wings what's happening and finding this glee in the destruction of the people around me. And that felt really dirty.
Yeah.
I felt very dirty after every performance, but it was also really fun to play that. It was so different, and it just gave me something more to chew on with in terms of a character. So trying to find that within me, like, do I really enjoy watching people suffer? And while the basic answer to that is no,
There's certain people
There are
that I would.
there's a little an aggressive Schadenfreude
Yeah.
where I'm like, oh, if only I could make these people suffer this way.
Yeah.
And so I did take from that place, and it was delicious, but then it made me feel dirty afterwards.
Sure.
Like, I'm not that mean person,
Yeah.
But again, I wanted to be an effective storyteller with not a lot to do. So
Yeah.
that's it definitely changes depending on the repertoire, the character, the genre of music. There's a lot more prep that goes into certain genres versus others. And
Let's get into
Yeah.
that a little bit, like, because I think, you do a lot of opera on tap, and so you're doing, in those performances, you're doing lots of different types of, you may do an aria or an art song or pop rock, different pop rock styles. Like, does that, I know you said the kind of, the approach to artistry doesn't necessarily change, but like, obviously you're thinking in different terms about style markers of
Yes.
the music, and which I think we would probably both agree, like, style markers are present in any music, whether it be Western classical or jazz or R&B. Like, every genre has their own style markers. I say that because there's been obviously the very Eurocentric view that it's like classical music and then everything else has,
yeah.
So we just,
There's a whole range.
yeah, there's a whole range. But does that, I know that artistry doesn't change, but what are some of those differences you were talking about, maybe?
Well, the interaction with the audience
Ah, that's interesting, yeah.
is a big change. There are those moments in all genre of music where it's a little bit of a, as singers like to call it, park and bark. But that doesn't mean you're not communicating. It
Right.
just means you're not necessarily wandering around and like actually engaging so directly with your audience member. Whereas there are genres that invite that. And I think one of the fun things I like, especially about something like opera on tap, is that you can break out of the traditional recital thing and use a more not introverted, a quieter style to reach out. Whereas you might not normally do that in a recital hall. But what's changed is it's given me the freedom to do that in a recital hall and all of a sudden engage the audience in a way I'd never done before.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because I learned to do that with musical theater and songbook standards and popular music. Like, why can't I talk to the person right in front of me and say, this is what I'm saying and I'm giving you advice, or whatever the character's doing?
Sure.
Why can't I do that with a piece written by David Sisco or Schubert or Laurie Laitman or whoever's music I'm doing?
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be written It doesn't have to be a contemporary piece. They've informed each other.
Sure.
So while my approach to what skills and artistry I'm using to communicate change, like I'm not going to be looking up a translation, obviously, for a language that I already understand and know.
Right.
But just finding a new way of communicating based on the genre is something I think is very important. What's traditional? What is non-traditional? Where do they overlap? Can they inform one another?
So can you talk about the relationship between artistry and technique for you? How can they how do they or have they supported each other? And maybe if you feel comfortable sharing a situation where maybe they haven't felt like on even footing.
Oh, yeah. They inform each other. It can be a precarious situation to not have the technique beforehand. And this happens with a lot of young singers. I think it definitely happened with me. When you find yourself, if you consider yourself or are considered an expressive singer, you use these tools, sometimes physical tools, to express. And if your technique is not at a certain level, it can impede your artistry.
Sure.
So finding that balance is really important, because you don't want to, I wouldn't as an artist want to sacrifice artistry because of technique. If my technique is not up to the standard it needs to be to sing a particular piece of repertoire, I have to figure those things out first. I'm not saying that I never did something that was beyond. I did a lot of things that were I was not
Haven't
ready.
we all?
Not ready for. But there's more freedom in artistry once you have the solid technique, and you can figure out artistic ways to work within your technique. If there's something that's not quite working and you know you're not there yet, but you're almost there, there's no need to shove the other thing under the carpet for a while or put it in a box until you are 100% ready.
Right.
Because you may never be 100% ready.
Who is?
Things change. You would carry instruments around, so you could get sick. You could find yourself singing at a really high elevation, and all of a sudden the breath work that you feel so confident in is like gone, and you don't know what's happening. That's when sometimes the artistry takes over, and while you might end up with a performance that your inner judge will say, well, that's not the best you could have done. You still didn't sacrifice your artistry.
Right.
You figured out a way to make it work. So that's something that's really important. A little anecdote. Sometimes the artistry, which often gets equated with ego, overtakes. I had a student years and years and years ago when I was teaching who was a very advanced singer for their age. They were still a teenager, but because they were very advanced, they had a teacher that was giving them repertoire far beyond their years because they could sing the notes.
Right.
And the notes are fine, but there was no artistry. So the student was singing and was very pretty. There was very little artistry. And so I attempted to, instead of saying, you shouldn't be singing this, I did not work with them on those pieces because I didn't feel like I could give them what they needed.
Sure.
In particular because the person was saying, I don't want to change these things. But I knew the person was very proud of their voice. So I suggested repertoire that showed off the same range of skill, but was something that would improve their artistry because it required a significant amount of storytelling and understanding of a style. So this was an Italian student, and I was like, why don't we look at these Neapolitan songs? And it was perfect. And in the end, they still were going to do what they were going to do.
Sure.
But in our coachings together, he did was able to explore artistry more because he wasn't just trying to sing the notes.
Right.
And I think that happens to a lot of us. And it certainly happened to me, especially when I was younger and I had ambitious goals, not necessarily for big arias, but for really difficult songs that I was very excited about. But I can sing this, and I could sing it, but it wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
So I think having the patience, and you mentioned this in your book about practicing like slow. Who was it? Andre de Shields that said something about
Slow is the fastest way
slow.
to get
Yeah.
from place to place.
Having patience in learning technique in order to explore artistry is so important, and it's so hard
It's so
to
hard.
do. It's so hard to do.
It's so funny because I'm practicing for this recording myself. I was like, all those things I tell my students day in and day out, I got to do this now.
Yeah, practice
It
what
is-
you preach.
In service of artistry, in service of that. I love what you were saying about how technique supports artistry, and that's interwoven. I always describe it to my students like, think of a painter's palette, and you start with white and black, and you can make gray, but that's kind of like it. But then as you continue to grow your technical foundation, you get colors and textures, and that's where it really gets to become fun. You get to really make choices.
And you never leave the technique behind. It's that you are able to fine tune. So once the technique is in a way in the background, and you're like, oh, I feel really solid with what I'm doing, so I can explore these things. And if something doesn't work, then you can ask yourself, why isn't this working? Is it a technical issue? How do I fix that?
Yeah.
How do I fine tune it? Or is what I'm trying to achieve here not really achievable in the moment or at all?
I find too, like, especially with Gen Z students, that a fear of taking risks, of trying different things.
Do you think it's because the idea of perfection, of wanting to get it right, and if I can't get it right, I don't want
totally
to
that.
touch that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to, well, and also like,
Fear of failure is scary.
Oh, it's so scary. And, it was such a kind of eye-opening moment that I share in the book that my student Josh, who's an amazing pop rock singer-songwriter, shared in the book that, he wrote this thing for the book because we were talking about this. He's like, sometimes I don't engage in my artistry because I think you'll be disappointed with me if I'm not singing singing the way that we talked about. And I'm like, oh my God, like, I'm so sorry if I ever made you feel like you couldn't engage your artistry in the voice studio. I absolutely want you to bring that in. And I think, I hopefully wasn't creating an atmosphere where that felt like it wasn't possible. I think it's more that I've also had this realization really lately that, as teachers, when we work with a student, we are working with a student who has a very long and specific history with different teachers.
Yeah.
Right. And so like that student is bringing in their own previous relationships. And so that's where it becomes very complicated.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's a spectrum that we kind of have to, kind of help students kind of slide back and forth on different pieces depending on what it is and how connected they feel.
Yeah, having a little leeway, and what you talk about being student-centered in your practice, it can be incredibly helpful. I was definitely, as a young singer, you knew this when you met me, but even before then, a very emotional, expressive singer, to the point where it would often impede my technique. Having postures like this because I wanted to share.
Yeah.
That is an issue. Choral singing, this happens a lot, where you'll hear the conductor say, diminuendo does not mean no breath support. You get quiet, not lazy, kind of thing. And so it was like, oh, I have to get quiet now, so now I have no breath support. And then the pitch goes all over the place and you can't finish a phrase. And what I just did speaking, I just ran out of that voice. So that was an issue. And so, but I was lucky in that I would try to attempt things maybe beyond my technique. We would work on it. Sometimes I got permission to work on it. And then if it didn't work, we'd put it away for a little while. It wouldn't be a forever thing,
Sure.
especially if it was a piece I felt passionate about. And then once I successfully figured out what was happening that I needed technically for that piece in another piece, then we could take it back out and say, what you did with this is what might inform this a little bit better.
Sure.
And it worked, mostly. Sometimes it didn't, and that's fine. And even now, as, 30 years later, or 20 years since you wrote Patterns, which will be on the recording, I have had a history with this piece, and I put it away for a good 10 years because as my voice changed, there were sections that I just couldn't sing. It has a middle C beginning. And back when I first started singing it, that was fine. It wasn't a very robust middle C. It was quiet and fine. But then my voice started to shift as I got older. And all of a sudden I sounded like a pubescent boy around middle C. My passaggio was there. And it was just weird. And I couldn't figure out whether or not to do chest voice or a head chest mix, and it just wasn't happening. So I just put it away, even though it killed me, because I love that piece. And now in my older ladyhood, I have a really good middle C again, and I was like, oh, I can sing this again. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
But it took putting it away until I went through that new rite of passage in my hormonal makeup.
How does collaboration impact artistry?
Oh, it can be awesome. And it can be challenging sometimes, depending on what the collaboration entails and with whom you are collaborating.
Sure.
There's the collaboration between the singer and the pianist or instrumental musician, whoever you're working with, or people. There's also the collaboration between a singer and a composer. Communication being key, and being able to find a middle ground if there are differences.
Like a common vocabulary, maybe?
Yeah. And goals, a common goal. The goal, I think, is even more than just the vocabulary. Because you and I, from the very beginning, have been,
Simpatico.
yes, totally great collaborators. I've worked with a lot of composers, and overall, it's been wonderful. One thing that's great, that can be fantastic for artistry in collaboration, is being able, especially working with a living composer, is being able to discuss changes or emphasize things that already exist that really help bolster artistry. Having a composer that sets things well for the voice, who sets poetry well, incorporates the vocal line with the instrumental part, so you know where you are. Do they inform each other? Those are all things that are incredibly helpful, and helpful with artistry, because if you're so caught up in trying to figure out how to hear your pitch in the middle of a phrase played by your pianist or string ensemble or whatever, you can't be thinking about, how am I going to express this, because I'm not even singing the right note or the rhythm or whatever. So those,
some would say I'm guilty of that. My music's not the easiest.
It's not the easiest. It is a tapestry, so you can find helpful, and there are the occasional moments where I'm like, I'm just gonna have to memorize that that interval. But overall, those things are very helpful. You being trained as a singer, I mean, also is very helpful, because you set things well for the voice. I rarely have an emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Right.
Which leads me to the opposite end of how collaboration can affect artistry. I have had an experience working with a composer who wrote beautifully for the voice, gorgeous music, wrote in a foreign language that that person did not speak, that I do speak, and had emphases all in the wrong places. And I understood the reason why, in terms of the sentiment in the piece and the dramatic impetus. So this person didn't speak the language and I did, and they set some of the words in a way that changed the meaning of the word because of where the accent was. And while I discussed this with the composer, and I said, I performed it in a rehearsal, and they got back in touch with me and said, oh, you changed the rhythms here. And I said, I tried not to change it too much because I wanted to honor what you wrote, but the meaning has changed in these words. And if they are pronounced this way, it's changing the poetry. And the person who originally said that they were open to collaborating was not really open to collaborating. And so I did what I could, because the person got back to me and said, well, basically kind of gaslighted and said, if this is the way you absolutely have to do it, I mean, that's basically questioned my artistry. Yes. And my ego's not so big that I was like, well, it's my way or the highway. I just said, I will do what I can to de-emphasize this syllable, even though it's on an emphasized note. There were high notes that emphasized a place that shouldn't have been emphasized.
Yeah.
But I felt like I had to sacrifice artistry and just hope that the people listening who understood that language didn't catch those moments. There were few, but it was...
Or didn't take them out of artwork experience.
Didn't take them out of the artwork experience.
Yeah.
So that can be challenging when the person you're working with is less collaborative than they purport to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been, just through the process of rehearsals for this recording, it's been so great. We just had rehearsals with Laura Strickling and David Fung, who's a brilliant pianist. And there's such warmth and openness in the room, and it's like, oh, right, this is when things are really good, when you know, like, it's safe to be like, hey, can we try this? Or like, could you, like, David has some really great things. He's like, can you rewrite this at, like, or beam this differently here? Because it impacts the way that I play it and how I shape this. I'm like, oh my gosh, of course, that makes perfect sense. I didn't think of that. Just like, more minds are better than one.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and that's another part of the collaboration between the performer and the pianist. Preparing for even the rehearsal with David this weekend, I've been working with a coach in DC who's also a dear friend and innately musical and just a brilliant pianist and wonderful and has great ideas. And she gave me some ideas that I hadn't really thought of. And it really changed for the better my interpretation of certain sections of the pieces. And she pointed out things that I hadn't noticed, because some of these songs I haven't sung in, a couple of decades. Others I pull out regularly for Endless Summer Taco Man is a staple in Opera on Tap because it's so entertaining.
It's a darn good title, I will say that.
It is. So, working with a collaborator who isn't afraid to explore ideas and is also respectful of performance practice, knowing that I've worked with the composer on what that person's trying to achieve.
Right.
So finding that balance,
Yeah.
finding new ideas, honoring older ideas, and meeting them, that is wonderful. And finding somebody you can do that with regularly is difficult. I had a chunk of time where I didn't have a pianist I had wonderful pianists and coaches to work with, but this is the first time in a really long time that I've had somebody that I really feel I can like
Build something,
build, yeah,
right?
build a relationship with.
Yeah, yeah.
Who's not just the person I go to coach the thing, who's lovely and we work well together, but who I'm very excited because hopefully we will be recording more of your music together. And, she's familiar with it now and enjoys it, and she's understanding your tonal language. And the more we work on it together, the more exciting it is, because yeah, it's just been a while since I've been able to create this family of collaboration. I have an opera company I work with in series where there is a great collaboration between directors that we've worked with and castmates, that all people who have sung with the company regularly. But my first love has always been recital singing, so finding a pianist that I can truly collaborate with is just such a gift.
So at the beginning of the podcast, I shared that some pedagogues have argued for a more artist-centered approach to, or definition of artistry, when compared to maybe like a consumerist approach. And within Western classical music, I perceive that there may be a master apprentice-y kind of feeling that can be tied up with artistry that is not necessarily either accurate or equitable by today's contemporary standards. And so I'm just kind of wondering, given your varied performance experience, where do you find yourself landing on the spectrum between artist or consumerist definitions of artistry?
Well, I think the foundation for that, I feel, has to do with the goal of the artist. What is your reason for doing what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
It's the definition, one's definition of success, of personal success. Is it, and all answers they're totally valid. Like, I want to be on world stages. I want to travel. I want to be known as the best Carmen or whatever. I want to be a great singer and teacher. Like, what are your personal goals? Mine have changed. Two goals have remained consistent from the time I was a toddler. I want to sing. I want to sing for you. And I want to tell you a story. Those are the two things that have never changed. When I was a teenager, I went through I'm going to go to college, I'm going to go to grad school, I'm going to do this summer program, and then I'm going to sing here and here and here, and then I'm going to sing at the Met and world stages, and that's my goal. And then as my life happened, and I pursued these goals, and I had detours, and I had things I didn't expect, and I had successes that I didn't expect, all of that changed. And my goal at a certain point became, I would like to sing for you and tell you a story regularly. So those two goals never change, but the scope of it, like becoming famous or traveling all over the world, well, that's great, fine. If that happens, wonderful. But I won't consider myself a failure if those things don't happen.
Yes.
And for some people, if those things don't happen, maybe it's not worth it for them. And that's fine, because it's such a hard thing to do to begin with. It's such a hard career choice, that if what you want you don't feel is achievable and you decide to do something else that you feel good about that is achievable, then great, do that thing. So that's the foundation. It's what are your goals? What do you consider personal success? The fact that I have a day job and I co-direct a chapter of this thing, and then I still am able to perform music that I love and work with a company that I believe in and work with composers and continue to try to perpetuate the art form, that's personal success for me. I don't need to be known by everybody. Yeah, that's irrelevant. The consumerist part is part and parcel of it, in that depending on what kind of music you're doing, I think is more relevant to the consumerist part. As things become more visual, as opera has become a more visual medium over the last decade or two with the HD performances and everything,
Sure.
people are way more attuned to what do I look like on camera? Like, I'm looking at myself, like, what does my hair look? Am I double chin? And so there are those things that impact your preparation, your artistry, your technique, everything that you might not have considered as much in a different era. There's also what is castable. I went through many years of, part of my love of art song was the poetry, but I also defaulted there for a very long time because nobody knew what to do with my voice, including myself. At this point, I can honestly say I am a Zwischenfach, which means switch. I swing mezzo. My voice wants to live in a middle lower range. I have some really good high notes, but I don't live up the top. I don't live at the top. It's not comfortable, and it never was comfortable. And I sang the wrong repertoire for a very long time because there was some facility in my movement, being able to sing coloratura. And exploring that was great, but it wasn't where my voice was. And it took a long time for my voice to mature to a point where I could say, oh, this is where I live. This is what I should be doing. And in hindsight, I have to have grace with the teachers that I had that were giving me sometimes repertoire that I was like, I'm not sure about this, because they didn't know what to do with my voice either.
Sure.
When you're a 23-year-old who's singing coloratura and has a terrible high C, but doesn't have to live up there, we're like, you can touch the high C and it'll be okay. With the rest of it's great. And I listen back now, I'm like, oh God, you sound like a chipmunk. And now it's all fine, but it took a really long time for my voice to mature and to find that. And so in terms of consumer driven, if you're a Zwischenfach, you have, maybe with contemporary opera, maybe it's different, but with the traditional roles, maybe 10 roles that you can sing. And if you, especially in today's visual driven medium, unless you're with a very wealthy company, if you have a body that doesn't fit into a pants roll, it's very difficult. Octavian is lovely in my voice, or it feels lovely, I should say. I was never going to be a boy. I was never going to sing pants rolls, honestly. My physique is not suited to it. I am short, I'm very curvy, and in terms of today's consumption, that's not going to be...
Which is a whole nother conversation that we need to continue to have.
I'm not going to be cast that way. You can't, there's not enough binding and padding to turn me into more than just a portly teenager. And that's fine, but it did limit what I could do on stage in a stage production. So I love singing a Carmen or a Dido, and a Rosina is wonderful, but there were so many things that would be great. And so I saved those for concerts,
Sure.
And I save my dramatic soprano arias for concerts, because there are certain roles that I can sing all the arias, but the ensembles just do not live in the right place and never will. And that's fine.
Sure.
So that's part of the consumer part, what's expected of you being put into a box. And that's the other thing in terms of flexibility and singing in different genre. I grew up singing in more traditional pop styles, jazz, R&B, gospel. I was a teenager when I was introduced to the classical repertoire, and I found compatibility vocally with that. And I had to decide which way I was going to go in terms of learning the technique. And I chose the classical route, and I set everything else aside for a good 20, 25 years. and then rediscovered singing that music once I felt comfortable enough in my technique to be able to do it somewhat effectively without sounding affected.
Sure.
Because really nobody wants to hear an opera singer try to sing a jazz tune and sound like an opera singer.
It's been done.
It's
There
been
are
done.
recordings.
Yeah. And if I can't do it effectively and using outside ears, I'm not going to trust myself completely
Sure.
with that. Like, oh, I sound great. I'm like, no, you sound like a square. I came back to it. I do a lot of songbook standards now, and I've gone back to some of my mariachi Mexican pop roots on occasion. It's dicey depending on what the song requires.
Sure.
So I'm not going to push myself to an unhealthy place, but I pick and choose those things that feel comfortable. And I'm able to do that now. I couldn't do it for a very long time because I didn't have a solid enough technique to be able to do that.
You're bringing up some really great points, and it at the time of this taping, this whole firestorm around Renee Fleming's comments. I don't know if you've
I saw, I started reading part of an article yesterday,
Yeah.
but I didn't get to
Of-
read the whole thing.
essentially her saying that, like, shame on institutions for bringing in students that you know will probably not have a career, right? And essentially for, to line your coffers, or, was what I kind of took from it.
Yeah.
And lots of people have had lots of things to say about it, but
I have my thoughts
yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah. And I have previously been part of programs where I felt the administration forced the department to, not my current place, just to be very clear, of employment, but other institutions where the administration kind of forced the department to bring in as many students as possible because it did line the coffers for the other, right?
100%.
Yeah. So there is that, but the reason that I'm bringing this up is not to be inflammatory, but it's to lift up the idea of what you're sharing, is that we undergo in education such an evolution. I mean, it's such an important, hard, wonderful time in our lives, right?
Yeah.
And I, was thinking back to, our time together, and I was, as we've talked about, had a very different kind of experience with
Very
grad
different.
school, where I basically was told silently and then not so silently that I wasn't really going to be useful as a singer, specifically in like opera situations, right? Although that's not what I heard. I heard just like in general,
Yeah.
right? And so, which some of that is my own stuff, and I receive, but yeah, like that there's that I'm really grateful for my training, even those parts that were difficult, because it necessarily led me to what I'm doing now, right?
Yeah.
And so that so somehow I'm not necessarily sewing a beautiful fabric here with that thread, but that it seems to me tied into this conversation about artistry, certainly, and this idea that that we kind of have to let our lives speak. I love Parker Palmer's book, Let Your Life Speak. It's a really great book about kind of finding your vocation, and and artistry, I think, is a very important part of that as musicians.
Yes. As far as that whole idea, the Fleming article, there is a middle ground. There's definitely a problem when you decide that a person at 17, 18, 19, even 20 years of age, you've made a pronouncement. You will never have a career, or whatever reason.
Yeah.
You don't know that because the person has so much growing. Then you have the opposite end of the spectrum. You're fabulous. You're going to go so far. I'm going to give you this and this and this. And that person may never have a career for whatever reason. There's damage. They undergo some kind of health thing, or they don't have good performance practice habits, or, they let ego drive them and don't put the work in, or whatever, or just the lack of opportunity and networking, which is a huge thing. Money. Some people have the money to take the summers off and do the summer programs and pay to sing and get all of the extra experience, and other people are working.
Yeah.
And so you just don't know how things are going to turn out. So when a student comes in at a young age, if they have the means to pursue that degree or that study, be it a degree program or just taking voice lessons or whatever, making that pronouncement at that age, I think, is a disservice.
It can be very harmful.
It can be incredibly harmful on both sides.
Yeah.
Mentally harmful on one, and mentally and possibly vocally harmful on the other. But finding the strengths of the person, meeting them where they are, meeting the student where the student is at that moment. Okay, maybe your voice is on the smaller side at the moment. Maybe it won't be giant. I mean, Kathleen Battle, gorgeous, smaller voice compared to like all of the other luminaries that were her peers.
Yeah.
But amazing. What was she told at a young age? Like, depending on who her teacher was, she could have been told at some point, you have the tiniest voice in the world. You're never going to be on a world stage. Likewise, a person who has a giant voice, this is cacophonous, or this is going to be great, but they never managed to like direct the sound, and it's just a splat of white noise. So you just don't know at that age.
Yeah.
And so being able to find the strengths and exploit those strengths, and I mean that in the best way possible.
Right.
Like, this person really understands musical phrasing and knows how to diminuendo appropriately and healthfully, while maybe this area of their technique all of a sudden gets stunted once they reach a certain place. But let's start with the things they can do and figure out how to work that into the areas that need extra help.
Sure.
That, I think, is an effective way of bridging that without telling the person one way or the other, you're going to be a success or you're going to be a failure.
Right. And it's like, I think about this a lot as a teacher. It's like, it's my job to figure out, yes, to be a guide technically, but also to figure out what makes you come alive.
Yeah.
Both with repertoire and,
What do you feel that you do well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how can we, as you said, how can we bolster that?
Mm-hmm.
So you were literally seen.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So excited to share this with people, because I think these are conversations we need to continue having. And there's not an answer, right?
No.
It's just like everyone is gonna bring their own history and culture and context to these discussions, and but the more that we continue to create space to have them, I think the more we can learn from each other and kind of expand our own definitions of artistry and expand our own definitions of creating spaces where people can come alive in their work.
Okay.
As I said at the beginning, there are so many different components to artistry, and as Elizabeth explained, while engaging in different genres may not change one's definition of artistry, different artistic tools may be used to explore the musical piece. And all of this is wrapped up in technique, collaboration, not to mention communication between student and teacher. So, how do you define artistry? Is there a component of today's discussion that would make you amend your definition? Or is there anything maybe you disagreed with? How do you help your students explore how their technique supports storytelling? And how does that necessarily change from student to student? Sound off. I would love to hear from you. You can email me at wholeheartedvoicepedagogy@gmail.com, or you can find me on the socials. My handle on most platforms is at Sisco Songs or at Wholehearted Voice Pedagogy. And look, you have made it this far, so why not subscribe to this podcast? We have new episodes that are coming out every 2 weeks, and some really, really cool stuff coming down the pike as always. More soon. Take care of you.